an interim. I had actually retired. But I had the very good fortune of spending 2 years as interim superintendent of the Dover-Sherburne Regional School District. And then last school year, I spent as interim superintendent for the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District. I had not necessarily planned to work as an interim once I finished up my 8 years in Winchester. My wife is an educator. She's a second grade teacher. She's going to retire next school year. But the Dover-Sherburne situation came up, and so I decided to go down and have a conversation with the school committees at Dover-Sherburne. There are actually 3 school committees, 16 school committee members.
Wow.
And I was interested because I had started my career as a superintendent in the King Philip Regional School District, and I really had enjoyed my time working in a regional system. Not to say that I didn't enjoy my time in Wilmington and Winchester, I actually did. I loved those communities, and ending my career in Winchester after 8 years was just, was really a terrific experience for me. But when I went to Dover-Sherburne, I learned that their superintendent had resigned suddenly at the end of March, and they were really facing, as they described it, a crisis of leadership. And the leadership team in particular had spent a couple of years under that particular superintendent really trying to find themselves, to find their role. And there was a lot of, as I came to understand it, a lot of micromanaging that was going on. So, we talked, and went through a kind of a very truncated process there, and they asked me to come on board. And so I was happy to do that. Halfway through that first year, they were very organized. They had started their search for a permanent right away, and had 2 finalists right at the beginning of December. They came to visit, and for whatever reason, they decided that those 2 finalists just weren't the match that they were looking for. So they came to me right before Christmas and said, "Do you think you could stay another year?" And so we were able to work that out, and so it was a great opportunity. I think that I was able to really make a difference there over a 2-year period, working closely with the leadership team, which was really a fabulous group of leaders who just needed to, they needed the superintendent to let them do their job. And that really has been my style. There has to be oversight, there has to be accountability, of course, but you need to let your leaders do their job. And so we had a very successful 2 years. I worked very closely with the permanent superintendent who was coming on board, worked with him the last 4 years in a transition, and that went very well. And then I thought I was going to, the school year ended, and I thought that I was going to play more golf that summer. And Acton-Boxborough came calling. Very similar situation, different circumstances. Superintendent left. The committee and the superintendent agreed to part ways in May, and it was there was a lot of public angst over that. And so I saw it as another opportunity with my experience to go into a district and help them get back on track. And again, I was very fortunate, fantastic staff, very hardworking school committee that took their job seriously, and I think we worked well together, and we really did some, there were 3 major initiatives that they had started over the course of the previous 3 years, and had done a really fine job of doing all the due diligence, the research, putting reports together, and had ready for recommendations, but they were never acted on. And so we were able to, during that year, go back, revisit, tweak, and have them acted upon. One was a changing school start times for the high school, which they've worked on for many years. So that worked out very well. And so last school year, again, my wife was working. I really had enjoyed the interims. There was nothing really around last school year, so I did play more golf, and that was good. That was productive for me. But this opportunity has come up this year, given my experience working with regional school districts and having a bit of some understanding of the Hamilton-Wenham district. At a previous time in my professional life, I was assistant principal and principal of Linfield High School, so we were in the same athletic conference. I can remember taking some trips up here to see some athletic contests. And Hamilton-Wenham has always had a very fine reputation. And I know that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, in their list of comparable districts for Hamilton-Wenham, Dover-Sherborne and King Philip actually are two of the comparables in that list of 11. So I think that the district, from very limited research, I think the district is in very good shape. I think you've had very fine leadership over the last 7 or 8 years. You're really in a good place, and I think it's very important for the interim superintendent to, in a situation like this, to be able to come in and really keep the ship steady, moving it forward, not necessarily at slow speed. I think it's important to continue to move forward. So any initiatives that the district has been working on, it's very important to keep those going, but really work hard with the staff and the committee in this transition period as you move to a new permanent superintendent. So I think I have the skill sets and the experience to help you do that in a very positive and constructive way.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that we have set aside 45 minutes, and that was very important information, but I just want to make sure you are aware that I also have 6 more questions for you.
Good.
And I don't want to press you, but want to make the best use of your time.
No, thank you, and I will really try
That's
to be
okay.
brief.
I just don't want to interrupt you, but I will if I have to.
Feel free.
Okay.
It will not be the first time.
She's a lawyer by profession, so she'll have no problem with that.
I get it.
Okay, so my next question, or our next question, is based on what you have learned about our district, what do you see your top 3 goals would be during your interim superintendency?
So what I've learned is I haven't been able to find, or I haven't come across anything related to a strategic plan, but I assume there are some long-term goals that have been developed and that you're working on, and certainly would want to focus on making sure that those continue. I think the second piece that I would look to ensure is that that there are no surprises as we go through the year. I think that as an experienced superintendent, any issues or crises that come up in some way or another, I've probably handled those kind of situations. So the learning curve is really very, very steep. It won't take some time. It won't take any kind of time. I think it's important to work with the Administration and Finance Office and the school committee, the 2 town finance committees and other officials to make sure that a responsible budget for FY21 is developed, so that the incoming superintendent will be able to not have to deal with any of those issues. I think it's important for the interim superintendent coming into Hamilton-Wenham is to be visible and to support staff as much as possible in whatever needs that they may have.
Thank you. Would you please describe your management style and why you think that would be a good fit for our district?
So my management and leadership style is definitely, I would call it collaborative. I work very well with all of the stakeholder groups. As I indicated previously, I really believe in letting the leadership team do their job, and I see my role, especially if they are experienced leaders, to let them do it and to act as a resource for them. I've been a high school principal in 2 different high schools, so I know what it's like to sit in that position. I've been an assistant principal, and so I really would see my role, and I've always seen my role as being a resource person. If there's someone with less experience or newly minted into an administrative position, I would also see part of my role in that collaborative style of being a mentor where I need to be and really working closely with them as they go through the year. My management style also is one where I work hard to develop positive partnerships, again, with the different stakeholder groups, especially on the municipal side with the different various committees, the town administrators. I think it's impossible for the town and schools to really have a positive relationship. It doesn't mean that we'll always agree on issues. It doesn't mean we'll always agree on how much should be in the budget. But if there's a positive relationship there, we can agree to disagree, and where there are areas where we can come together and compromise, those positive relationships really make a difference in that regard. And I'm a good communicator. I'll keep the school committee abreast of issues as they come up. I really believe strongly in doing that. There are many different types of issues that come up where I may not be able to be as specific with you about these issues, but I will let you know when there are serious things going on, and just so you're aware, and that when you're, in the grocery store on a Saturday and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, what about, I heard this," at least you'll know about it. So I try very hard to do that.
Great.
Have you ever had to assist a school committee in the superintendent search process as a facilitator, advisor, or administrator?
So 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so 3 times I've done that. Actually, something I'm very proud of, when I was leaving King Philip but when I was leaving the Wilmington Superintendency, the school committees in those 2 districts did not do a formal search. They actually appointed in King Philip my director of curriculum, and in Wilmington, the assistant superintendent, both who were people that I hired, who I work closely with, and I take a lot of pride in that. In Winchester, I acted as an unofficial advisor to the school committee as they were going through their process. The chair and I would meet quite regularly, and when they asked for my opinion about certain processes or protocols around the search, I would gladly share that. I tried not to get into personalities and talk with them about the finalist candidates. Don't see that as my role as the interim superintendent, but to help facilitate that process. So I did that at Dover-Sherborne Regional, and I actually did it in Acton-Boxborough. At Acton-Boxborough, they weren't as organized in starting the process as the Dover-Sherborne committees were. So I did help them get that process started. I led them through the process of securing a consultant. They happened to use NESDEC. So I led that process for them. Once NESDEC came on board, they then took that process over. But as an interim superintendent, I see the most important part of my role around the hiring of a new superintendent is once the superintendent is elected by the school committee. I think it's a very important part of the interim superintendent's role to work with the incoming superintendent on the transition period, and I was able to do that effectively both at Dover-Sherborne and Acton-Boxborough Regional.
Thank you. What is your experience in negotiating union contracts and the purchase of land?
Oh, in negotiating contracts, over 21 years, I've negotiated, and in most cases, been pretty much the lead negotiator in probably a couple of dozen contracts. Teacher association contracts, custodial contracts, teacher assistant, secretarial union contracts. So I have a lot of experience in doing that, and I feel very comfortable in that role. Every school committee has a little different process in how they go about that, and each school district, there are key staff who are involved. In some districts, in Acton-Boxborough, the assistant superintendent for personnel, that was one of their main responsibilities. And we negotiated a couple of contracts last year, and I was there to assist her and help her and advise her in that role. In terms of purchasing land, I have not been involved in any negotiations to purchase land. I have been involved in Winchester in particular when we were going through the process of getting to working with the MSBA to rebuild a new Winchester High School, which I was intimately involved in. We did look at 3 or 4 parcels within the community to where we considered placing a new high school, and in each case, it just turned out it wasn't the right location. But in terms of actually negotiating the purchase of land, I haven't had that experience.
Okay.
But I think it would be, again, a very steep learning curve in figuring out how to do that.
How familiar are you with the needs and issues of a regional district, and what is your experience in managing those complexities?
So when I went to Dover-Sherborne 3 years ago, I had to do a quick primer reminder on regional school district regulations, protocols, policies. I had not, it had been 12 years since my time at King Philip, but I think I'm very familiar. I think the intricacies and complexities of building a regional school budget are just very different than building a school budget on the municipal side, just the one single community side. It's very different. Regional agreements, I've found, they're not necessarily cookie cutter. They're very different from region to region, and from everything from how capital expenditures are both funded and voted on, or where they reside, in the town meeting process. In some districts, capital is part of, a section of the operating budget. In other districts, it's a separate budget for the region. And then in King Philip, it was separate warrant articles for each individual item. So they can be very different. But I think a review of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional Agreement is certainly something that I would engage in should I be the chosen candidate. So the budget is certainly one thing. State funding is very different. The state funding, again, depending on how the regional district is set up, but Hamilton-Wenham and Acton-Boxborough are similar, have similar structures in that regard, being K-12. Dover-Sherborne, there was the regional grade 7 to 12, and then the separate Dover budget, Sherborne district. Chapter 70 went to the town in the individual districts. Those 2 towns were spending well above net school spending, so Chapter 70 wasn't really even a discussion in building those 2 budgets, but it becomes a different matter at the regional level. The money comes right to the regional school committee, and so, again, there are nuances in every regional district related to that funding. Regional transportation funding, is another one of those areas where, in my opinion, the state has not or never has met its obligation under the law to fully fund regional school transportation. And that's always an issue. I know that the Regional School Association pushes at the state level, and I think that's important that we continue to do that. And then how regional districts utilize their excess and deficiency accounts from year to year. And, some districts have developed policies on where they want to see the level of E&D remain before there's a consideration of using it to reduce the tax rate in the member communities. So from finances to state funding, budget, state funding, and how enrollment is calculated as in assigning the apportionment share again of the budget. It's done differently in different districts. And then maybe the last thing I would say is it can be, for some regional districts, a challenge in developing a culture among students and even staff and parents when you have students coming from different communities into the schools. I would think that's not as a real big issue in Hamilton Wenham. I don't know that for sure, but my sense is it probably is not. So I guess a few examples.
Thank you. How would you describe the differences between a permanent superintendency and an interim superintendency?
Well, you're going to hear different answers to this, I would imagine. But in my 3 experiences now as an interim superintendent or acting superintendent, I look at the role as I'm acting like the superintendent. I don't really see much of a difference at all. The work has to be done, and so the superintendent or interim superintendent's responsibility is to make sure that the work is done, that the adults are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that we're looking out for students, and even if you're superintendent for a year, decision-making should really be based on what's in the best interest of students. That really is our top priority. That's very easily said, but the fact is that there are many, many decisions where there are a lot of other nuances to those decisions. But the only one difference I think I would say is I think it's important that if the school committee or the staff or the community have ideas during an interim superintendency period about, they're really feeling strongly about starting some new initiatives. What I have counseled in my 3 different opportunities is that I think it's better to slow down and not necessarily look at making major changes during an interim superintendency. Because if there's a need for major changes, you really need to have the buy-in of your permanent superintendent. You don't want to go through a process of making a major change, then having the permanent superintendent come in and say, gee, I'm not sure I would have done it that way. I'm not really comfortable with that. So it doesn't mean that the district doesn't move forward. We continue to move forward, and there are many ways to do that. But I think that would be where I would say that's probably the only difference I would see between the term of an interim superintendent and the permanent superintendent.
That concludes our prepared questions for you. And at the
Which means it gets a really long closing
at this
statement.
time, you have 20 minutes, if you like, to make a closing statement or perhaps,
A
Not sure how I feel
dissertation
about that.
summary.
to perhaps offer any other information about yourself and your experience that might be helpful to the school committee.
Sure. So if by chance you decide to check my references, and I think maybe you got copies of some of them. the one thing and I'm a little surprised, because the one thing you won't find in those references, you won't find anybody saying that one of Bill's strengths is his brevity in answering questions. So especially as a superintendent for 21 years, I've tried really hard not to go off the rails. And I sometimes could do that because I just feel like I have a lot that I want to share. So I'm glad I was able to stay within the time frame here. I guess I would ask, I'll make a quick statement. I have one question, I guess, and then I hope that my answers weren't too brief, that you didn't get a sense of what you were trying to get at through my answers. So if you would like to answer, if you would like to ask follow-up questions, that would be certainly fine with me. But I think what I can bring to Hamilton Wenham as a superintendent, and this is a bit of a summary, I guess, of what I've just said, is 21 years of experience as a school superintendent, 9 of those 21 years in a regional school district. And so I would feel really comfortable coming in from day one. I think learning about Hamilton Wenham, would start prior, of course, to actually the first day. Some of that's already started. But I feel the learning curve would be really, really steep. And I'm really not concerned about that at all. I've had experience as an interim, so that's another plus in terms of really understanding. I think I have a good understanding of that role. And again, very much related to that, given the experience, I'm not going to be someone that will be spending the year learning the job. I'm going to come right in and from the start. Hopefully, you'll have the confidence, and you will see that there will be a level of perhaps comfort, and less perhaps worry about that. So, I guess the one question I would ask is what are you as a committee looking for? What kind of skill sets in the interim superintendent?
Right, and so as a collective committee, we decided that we were not going to field questions from the candidates, in fairness to all of the finalists. But again, if there's anything else that you would like to offer to us that you feel you haven't already discussed, I would believe that would be part of your closing statement, if there's anything.
Yeah. No, I don't think there is, frankly. This was an opportunity for me to come in and meet with you to meet with me, and I really appreciate that. If I happen to be someone you have further interest in, I would encourage you to check my references, and if you have any other questions after I leave, I'd be happy to follow up, but I really appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Thank you very much. It was.
Thank you. So, did you understand that this is a sort of a screening process, and there would be okay.
I do.
Okay. I do. Wasn't sure.
That
okay.
was my understanding.
Yeah. All right. It was very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming in tonight.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with your search.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you, sir. Nice meeting you. Do the cameras?
Yeah, well.
Did the widescreen TVs come down so we can watch the Bruins, Celtics, and Red Sox?
I wish.
I will stay in the car.
So, good evening.
Hi.
My name is Carrie Gertz, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee, and I will be facilitating this interview tonight. Just so you're aware, we have allotted 45 minutes for your questions, and we are not intending for this particular part of the process to be a dialogue back and forth, so we won't be fielding any questions from you. We will at the end give you an opportunity to make a closing statement or add any additional information that you think would be beneficial to us.
Thank you.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
In 45 minutes? My name is Herb Levine. I am former superintendent of schools in Peabody. They asked me to come back for 1 year. I stayed 4. I retired from Salem in 2005 as superintendent of schools, spending 7 years there, built 4 schools, and got the money to rehab the high school, which was done after I left. Former deputy superintendent in Wakefield, and the rest of it you can read from the resume. I don't want to take up any more time. I had a lot of stories to tell you.
Okay. Why did you apply for this position?
I like to work, and I like being a superintendent. I know the job well. I think my record and reputation would suggest that I do it well. I like people. I've enjoyed my year off very much. Have not improved much as a golfer. Time to get back to work. I have 5 grandchildren, but 3 of them are fairly grown. 2 are in college. I have 2 little ones that live around the corner from me, so I've gotten to spend a lot of time with them. I will continue to spend a lot of time with them, but my life is very full, very happy, and working is part of that. So for as long as I'm healthy, I'll continue to work.
Based upon what you've learned about our school district, what would be your top 3 goals during your interim superintendency?
Do no harm would be number 1. And I think that's important. Hamilton-Wenham doesn't seem to be a place that's in disrepair, that needs somebody to come in and be a fixer. So I think do no harm is an important first goal. A second goal would be to develop a plan of goals with the school committee. However it is that you do that, whether it be with the chair, with the subcommittee, or with the whole committee, a committee as a whole. I think it's very important for us to be on the same page right from the very beginning. What is it that you want me to look at? What is it that you want me to do? If there are things that you're concerned with, what are they, and how do we formulate those in goals, actions, and then measurables, and then move from there. So that would be a second goal, would be to establish goals. And the third goal would be to build relationships. I think it's really important, even though I'd only be here for a year. Relationships of trust are critical. People don't like to work with people that they can't trust. As a matter of fact, I would say that they really don't work well with people that they can't trust. So building relationships of trust. And that comes from being in schools, with principals and teachers, where they live and where they do their work, talking with students and enjoying that dialogue, meeting with parents over the summer, meeting with the administrative team over the summer, developing goals with and for them as well would be critical and important. I want to take walks through the schools with the principals. I want them to tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly, what it is that they need, how it is that I could support them. So the third goal would be to develop really that whole entry plan and implement it with common sense and good judgment.
Thank you. Would you please describe your management style and why you think that would work well in our district?
I think my management style works well anywhere because it's embracing kindness, compassion, decency, and dignity, working with people, respecting the talent that they bring to the table, always asking for, listening to carefully opinions of others. And by the way, that's really important in a one-year interim because you folks know the system better than I do, and you always will. I'm only going to be here for a year. I need to know how this system functions, and I need to know that early on. I need to rely on the people that are going to be closest to me, the administrative team, the school committee, PTO presidents, directors, people who have been here, who understand the school system, who understand from their perspective what's important for me to know, what's important for me to do. And I need to put that all together into some sort of a format that works for you and works for me, that will be in the best interest of kids. Bottom line is that I think teachers who work in classrooms with the most important job that we have on the planet every day, and I truly mean that, what could be more important than teaching kids every day, regardless of grade level? Where else do parents trust their kids 6 hours, 7 hours a day without them being there? Only schools. I think that all decisions that are made in schools need to be made in the best interest of kids, period. Kids are always number one. Without kids on the other side of the door waiting to get in, there is no job. There's no reason for us to be. So we have to understand that all decisions that are made in school systems are made with the best interests of kids in mind. And I think that having a leadership style like that really speaks to what is important to everybody who's in this business, and that is to make the lives of kids better every day. So my management style, the way that I think, and my values, I think really speak to what teachers, other administrators, and the greater community will appreciate.
Thank you. Have you ever had to assist a school committee in the superintendent search process as a facilitator, advisor, or administrator?
So that's a great question, thank you. When I was the superintendent in Peabody, they did 3 searches. 2 of them failed. It was, and I said this publicly, I don't think that the sitting superintendent has a place in a position that I was in Peabody, to have influence over the next superintendent. I think that's, especially with that being my hometown, where my kids grew up and I knew all the players, I think that would have been unfair and would have been seen as unfair. So that if the person who I wanted to get the job, who eventually did get the job, got the job with me being actively involved in the search, that would hurt her. So in the long term, at least with some people. I mentored her for 4 years. My deputy superintendent did get the job as superintendent. I stayed out of the process as much as I professionally could. When asked a question, I gave an answer. In this position, being an interloper from Peabody, not a Hamilton Wenham person, and being very familiar with the superintendent process, I think that I could very easily help you if you asked. And I could help you actively, I could help you from the outside looking in. I know the process very well, and I've worked with MASC and other folks who conduct superintendent searches in the past, so I would feel very comfortable doing that if asked here.
Thank you. What is your experience in negotiating union contracts and the purchase of land?
I bought my house. So I've never had to negotiate the purchase of land because every time I've built a school as a superintendent, we've already owned the land that we built the school on. I'm quite certain that I could get up to speed quite easily. I've been extraordinarily active in building of schools, which means working with architects and construction folks and project management almost on a daily basis once that process begins. But honestly, I've never had the opportunity to purchase land, so I can't say that I have any experience there. There was a first part of that question.
Union contracts.
So I've had multiple experiences negotiating union contracts, the last of which was the one in Peabody. I've negotiated 2 contracts in Peabody. I negotiated 3 in Salem. And I was the lead negotiator as the superintendent asked me to be the lead negotiator in Wakefield for 2 contracts. So I think I've negotiated 7 contracts. I need to tell you that I come from a union household. My father was a union president of 2 unions. I never went that route. I have a great deal of respect and actual affection for what unions do and why they think the way they think. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to agree with each other, but it does mean that we sit across the table from each other in respectful dialogue with dignity, understanding each other's points of view. I like to ask a lot of questions during contract negotiations because when a union person puts a proposal forward, if I don't understand what it is that the impact might be from their perspective, I ask them, why is this a good thing? Because there are some union proposals actually that have come forward that I think really don't work for the union. Why would they want that? So the dialogue needs to be positive. It needs to be productive. Nobody goes away from the table getting everything that they want. Nobody goes away from the table getting nothing. There needs to be compromise. There needs to be a working relationship. And from there, I think you can get to anywhere that you need to get to, as long as it's mutual and as long as it's respectful. I know contracts. I know contract language. Different parts of contracts can be interpreted differently, and that's why you have the process for the unions to come before you if they have to, after going through principals and the superintendent. That process is there for a reason. It's healthy. It should not be seen as a negative. You won't necessarily always agree with the union's position, neither will I. But at some point through that process, we all might learn something. And maybe people change minds because of that process. So I think, respecting that process, respecting the fact that we will not always agree, respecting the fact that everybody wants the best for their people, and respecting the fact that there are certain constraints on our side of the table and theirs. I mean, they also need to be able to bring something back that's going to pass. So we have to be mutually respectful and understanding. I would say that I don't know if there's a union person at the table, but call your counterpart if you are in Peabody. His name is Bruce Nelson. He will tell you how I handle union negotiations and union issues. I mean, it's a relationship that also includes personnel issues. It includes day-to-day contact. Bruce and I met every month. We had a scheduled meeting every month. He brought in some people. I brought in my deputy superintendent, and we just talked about the issues of the day. We headed off an awful lot of problems by doing that. So good, solid communication throughout the district, starting with the superintendent, to you and to everybody else, is important, and it's something that I prize heavily.
How familiar are you with the needs and issues of a regional district, and what is your experience in managing those complexities?
Yeah, well, I was the superintendent in Blackstone Millville, 2007. So it's 11 years ago. I'm very familiar with it. I remember a lot of it. There are some things I don't remember. I know it's there somewhere. I would need to sit with the business manager and remind myself about the nuances of budgeting in a regional district as opposed to a non-regional district. But I found that quite easy to learn and quite quick. I don't think that there's any surprises for me with a regional district. I did it. I know it. On a day-to-day basis, I didn't find it much different than Peabody or Wakefield or Salem. Basically, you're there to make the lives of kids better, and you can do that in a regional district, a city, a rural district, a suburban district.
How would you describe the differences between a permanent superintendency and an interim superintendency?
Once you hire the interim superintendent, there is no difference. So if you offered me the job, I would consider the word interim off of my title. I would be a superintendent of schools. There is no difference. There shouldn't be a difference. The only caveat to that would be that as a one-year person, I'm not going to come in, and you wouldn't want me to come in and turn things upside down, nor do you need that here. But there are a lot of things that I can do for you and with you from an outside perspective in 1 year without worrying about a 30-year career that if you ask me to do them and we set them as goals, I can give you back a lot of information. For example, I don't know when the last time you did a climate study was, but every 10 years, it's probably a good idea for a school system to send out a climate study to parents, to teachers, kids, the greater community, town side of folks. How do you feel about your school system? And if you have the right questions, you can gain a good perspective that, when you're doing this thing every day, and you have a hard job as a school committee, I have a hard job as a superintendent, everybody has a hard job. They're, working hard every day. Sometimes your nose to the grindstone doesn't allow you to take a look at the greater picture and say, ooh, how did that happen? Well, you might want to gauge that on a fairly regular basis. So there are things that we could discuss. Your special ed program, are you happy with it? What are the percentages that you send out to different, outside placements? What are the percentages that you have in special ed? Does it match up with the state and like communities? Are you happy with the programs that you have? Are there places where you could expand programs and educate more special ed kids here than the ones that you might send out? There's just a lot of things that I could look at for you as a one-year wonder. However, on a day-to-day basis, from the day that I start until the day that I end, what I am is your superintendent of schools. I'm your superintendent for kids, I'm your superintendent for staff, I'm your superintendent for principals. That doesn't change. So I would say, really, there is no difference.
So you have very efficiently answered our questions.
Bill McElduff is a very good friend of mine. He hugged outside. He said, it's a quick one.
Well, we knew what we needed to elicit from you. So if you would like to take some or all of the remaining time to give either a closing statement or highlight some other things that you don't feel we had asked of you yet, you can feel free to do that now.
I think you need to know that at least I think of myself, and this isn't a place to be modest, so I'm a good guy. I treat people well. I care about people. I'm kind and decent to people, compassionate. If you made phone calls anywhere that I've worked, I think for the most part, for the very most part, you would find that same kind of description. I think that's important for anybody that you bring in for a year, and I wanted you to know that. I'm good to people. People like working with me. I also make people around me better. I have a great deal of experience. I know what good instruction is. I will be in your schools. I'll be in your classrooms. Not to threaten anybody. I want to see the good stuff that's going on. Talk shop to teachers on their turf. What are you doing here? How can I help you? What support do you need? I don't care if it's a light bulb that blew out and nobody changed it, or a science book that's too old and they're concerned about that. I want to hear those things. I want to hear it from principals. So I'm a very active superintendent. I'm in schools a lot. My communication style is immediate. I also demand that of my principals. Never a day should go by where you haven't returned a phone call or an email, period. The worst thing that somebody can say about you is that, and they didn't even get back to me. Doesn't matter what message you send back. They may not agree with you. It might not be the answer that they want, but at least get back to them. So my communication style with you would include a weekly Friday jottings that you would receive from me, which would be kind of a compilation of what happened during the week. Important or crisis things you'd get immediately from either me or my executive assistant, depending upon what's going on. You would get general information, not specifics. You're a policy board, I'm the CEO. I expect that I would be managing the school system and leading the school system on a day-to-day basis. As a policy board, you need to know. You should never be surprised. That's not because I expect you to take any action. It's because I expect you to have the information. So if something really nasty happens, I'm going to let you know in general terms what's going on, so that when you're at the market and the parent says, because it always leaks out and it's always on social media, did you hear about, you can say, yes, the superintendent informed me and he's handling it. I'm a good communicator, and I have that same communication style with principals. They should expect the same from me as I expect from them. And I think principals are critical to the running of the school system. They lead their schools, they know their staff. I will never undermine a principal under any circumstances. So I'm good at my job, I know my job, I've done it for a long time, you see it on my resume. I've done it locally, there are people that you can call. I'd like to be a superintendent for a year, and if not, I wish you well. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, even if it was for only 45 minutes. I have 45 minutes worth of stories, but now I can make the third period of the Bruins game.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
It was very nice to meet you.
I'm going to take you
Thank you, please do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.